welcome back to another episode of Pokemon Knowledge. On today's episode, it's going to be more or less an update video on a previous video I had made on the channel in the past talking about CGC. And at the time, I hadn't really had any graded card submission back. I was just talking more or less from what I was seeing from the outside looking in at how CGC was operating, what their grading scales were like, and now that I've actually got a couple cards back, I could actually speak a little bit more to it. And I could tell you that I was incorrect on some of this stuff. I was surprised by some, and, just the overall feel that I'm getting for CGC. And, real quick to preface, my previous video was a little harsh on CGC, and there was a reason why. The reason why that video I felt needed to be a little harsh was because I wasn't seeing any sort of harshness towards CGC. And a lot of the praise that CGC was getting very, very early on, I felt a lot of it was very unwarranted. And the reason why I say it was unwarranted was, yes, while they were not new to the grading market as a whole, of course they've been around grading comic books forever, they were very new to the grading market when it came to trading cards. And at the time of some of my earlier videos, it was the end of December 2020, early January 2021, and then I made another CGC video in April 2021 when they had increased their prices and they had more or less had their website crash and stuff like this. But at the time of my early videos, there was ton of praise and there wasn't like a ton of cards really submitted to CGC. And honestly, a lot of the hype behind CGC felt very fake to me. And it felt like a lot of people more or less like shilling CGC, and a lot of the accounts that were really talking about it, I did not truly believe that they were real. So that's what this video is going to be. This is going to be an update, and it's really going to just talk about a lot of my experience. And at the same time, was the harshness that I gave CGC in the past, has that held true, or has that more or less faded a little bit? So the first thing you got to really talk about anytime you look at any grading card company is what the turnaround time is. If you submit a card to that company, when do you expect to get it back? And honestly, it's never really been a great experience ever. You look at what's happened to collectors and investors in 2020, 2021, when it came to submitting their cards to different grading companies, it more or less felt like people were being dragged through the mud. Turnaround times didn't mean anything. And mainly when we talk about grading, before CGC, you talk about Beckett or PSA. And PSA, their turnaround times are just a thing of make-believe at this point. But the problem was that a lot of people who had graded with these companies, however it happened, as sad as it is to say, got used to being treated very, very poorly by these grading companies when it came to what the actual true turnaround time is. And as the customer, because that's what I am, that's what you are, the people actually grading the cards, as a customer, the customer's experience was never great. So when you have a new grading card company come in, the first thing you hope is going to happen is that customer service aspect, that transparency would change. So with CGC, we saw advertised 30-day turnaround time. So we expected, almost stupidly looking back on it, that if somebody was advertising 30-day turnaround times, you would get your cards back, on a 30-day turnaround time. And yes, the 30-day turnaround time for CGC is advertised as 30 business days or 30 I think they use the words working days, but it's the same thing as business days. So, at 20 business days per month, you expect the expected turnaround time at 30 days to be around 3 months. And that was not true. It was anything but true. So that was the very initial feeling that I got for CGC was, oh, great. Here we go all over again. We got a brand new card grading company, and what's one of the very first things they do, and what should really be the foundation of a quality service, customer service, is just to straight up lie about turnaround time. So that was why I always felt, CGC was failing at first. And what we've already seen happen, and I'm continuing to see happen, is CGC has not changed, like the lack of transparency when it comes to true turnaround times. I will say one thing. CGC has lowered their turnaround times from, a high of like 228 days for bulk, and they actually dropped it to 176 working days for bulk and 102 working days for economy. And that, from the outside looking in, looks fantastic. But again, I don't know why they changed those times, because right now, if you look at the turnaround times for bulk at 176 and economy at 102, that is a very drastic difference, obviously. It's a difference of 74 working days. But as I'm going to put on the screen right now, a submission that I had sent, a submission that was received on February 10th of 2021, is still in the process of being graded for my economy submission. But my bulk submission that was submitted on the exact same day, no difference, has already been shipped and delivered to me. It was shipped out on July 15th. The current date is July 24th. So again, all I'm trying to say is that these turnaround times are continuing to mean nothing. And if you're going to have an advertised turnaround time 74 business days lower than your bulk tier, but yet you can't get cards out that were submitted on the same day faster than the bulk submissions, like, you need to go back, CGC, and look at where you're failing people, because this is a huge failure. And it's a huge failure because they're, like I said, those turnaround times had actively been updated very recently. So it's just something to definitely keep in mind. And, I just wanted to put that out there. So one of my big complaints with CGC before, and maybe it's going to change, and I'll let you know why or why it has not changed, was that I originally thought that CGC's customer service was very shitty. In fact, it was a huge pile of shit of how bad their customer service was. And the reason why was for two reasons. One, the famous, customer service response from Shane H. talking about whether or not, if you do not pay for subgrades, if you can still get a perfect 10. And a lot of you guys out there might be listening and say, yes, you can get a 10 without subgrades. But the huge caveat to that is the same today as it was then, that you can only get a pristine 10 if you don't pay for subgrades. The perfect 10, which is their other 10 grade, is hidden behind a paywall. So at the time, I found that really hard to digest, but what really, made me upset was how their customer service responded to it. And the famous, quote was from Shane H. And he said, "The only way to get a perfect 10 is to pay for subgrades and receive 4 10s. On the subgrades, grading with subgrades takes 3 to 4 times longer than without. So to examine every card in that level of detail, even those that do not pay for subgrades, is not feasible." And as I'm sure you're reading that and I'm sure you're listening to that, you could understand that is the biggest crock of horseshit in the history of any response I've ever seen. And the reason why, and it's always been the same, is you cannot get that overall grade, whether there's subgrades on that card or not. It is impossible to get that overall grade if you don't assign grades anyways for edges, surface, corners, and centering. It is impossible to get that overall grade. So his response to say that in order to give subgrades, you have to look at cards longer and harder, and that it takes longer, is the biggest slap in the face. Might as well spit in people's faces when it comes to a response. So that was my initial experience with their customer service, was just going through their chat room and reading their different responses. Then in April, when CGC had their big price increase to what we currently are at for $15 for bulk. A lot of people had tried to, do a very late submission on the last day, and CGC's website continued to crash, and people spent hours just trying to upload a very small amount of cards in order to submit them for grading at those lower prices. And then, like the very next day, CGC released a statement saying, we're sorry that the website crashed, but we're not going to, credit anybody for those prices, but we'll give you a longer time to like mail the cards to us. Just like some crock of shit response again. So these were the two experiences that I had with CGC's customer service. And again, these were very mass responses. You have the chat board being a mass response because it's visible by anybody looking at it. And then the second one was just like a newsletter they had posted. So I had contacted CGC's customer service and asked, well, listen, I tried to get my submission in. I wasn't able to, but I would still like to submit this submission. And it wasn't my fault that your website was crashing. Really, I felt that responsibility fell on CGC. And the response I got back, guys, was okay. Yeah, you heard me right. The response I got from their customer service was okay. You can submit at our older prices. But I just felt that was very unfair to everyone else because they literally put that newsletter out telling everyone they could not do that. And then they went around and literally told me that I could do that. And that, yes, I could be grandfathered in at those older prices. And why I don't think that was fair was because they didn't make it advertised. They didn't let everyone know that that's what they were doing. Instead, they went out of their way to lie to their customer base again. And guys, this is why I just really had like such a sour taste in my mouth, is because they just continue to lie to their customer base. And I don't feel that makes, a strong business model for the long term. And I know a lot of you guys are listening, and again, I'm very negative towards CGC only because I'm telling you what actually happened, what my experiences were, what the crock of shit that they're literally telling people, and a lot of people are just taking it, and it's just like this continuing thing that's happening with the different grading card companies. And don't get me wrong, I've been very harsh on PSA for a long time, but that's not really the topic of this video. The topic of this video is CGC. And so now it brings up the question, okay, well, I've had a few submissions returned to me. Now I've had well over, close to 200 cards returned back to me, between the cards that I've had returned back, between the CGC cards that I've bought on the secondary market. I've had time now to look at a lot of cards at a variety of different grades. So what do I think their actual grading standards are? And I'll tell you right now, originally I went into CGC expecting their grading scales to be extremely harsh. And that is true and false at the same time. CGC is very lax when it comes to their 8 grades, in my opinion, and their 9 grades when it comes to vintage cards. When it comes to modern cards, CGC is very tough on modern cards, and they dock a lot of points. And I get nervous with this, and I understand the argument is that maybe you shouldn't grade vintage cards as harshly as you grade modern cards, but I don't believe that's true. I think the scale should be across the board the same. If you're going to dock points off for vintage cards, you should dock the same sort of points off for modern, but that's not really what, in my opinion, CGC does. CGC, like I said, docks modern cards way harder than they do vintage. And what I really get nervous at is at their lower grades, CGC, in my opinion, is very inconsistent. And the video that will follow this video tomorrow, or maybe even, yeah, probably tomorrow, I'll be comparing CGC lower grades. And why is, why does that matter? And a lot of you guys are going to say, who cares if CGC is inconsistent at, call it CGC 5s? Who cares if they're inconsistent at 5s? Why does that matter? It does matter because if you want to go with grading card companies, it's very important to have consistency across the board. And the cards that I will show tomorrow will be the exact same grade. They will be the exact same card. And the grading of those cards will be so drastically different. And when I say drastic, I'm talking massively different. Like, to the point where somebody who has zero experience grading cards will be able to very quickly identify, the difference within the grades of the two cards, even though they are both graded the same. And, that's very important. But now it brings up the question, well, if CGC is so harsh when it comes to grading, what will that mean for the long term? And when you look at harsh for grading, that's not really new to the hobby. And when I say it's not new to the hobby, is really, you kind of start talking about that 9.5 grade. And those 9.5 grades, when it comes to 10s, are very hard to really see any kind of crazy amount of difference that really pulls back a card. CGC, I've also noticed, is very harsh on centering for cards. And they're not as harsh for some of the other things when it comes to those 8 or 9 grades. But the question is, well, if they don't have the 9s, then I said it's not new. And what I'm really talking about when I say it's not new is I'm really referring to Beckett. Because Beckett has always had their pristine 10 or even their black label, which their black label is more or less almost unattainable, especially when it comes to vintage for Pokemon. Yeah, we do see some pristine. So yeah, CGC is very comparable when it comes to that sort of harsher grading. But the question needs to be, what is the long-term effects that this could have on a company? And really, when you talk about long-term and short-term effects, you got to look at what do the prices of their grades command on the secondary market. And yes, while CGC's upper echelon perfect 10s, pristine 10s, they do carry a little bit of weight over PSA, it's not drastic enough. And when I say it's not drastic enough is meaning if you're going to submit a huge amount of cards to CGC versus if you were able to submit those cards to PSA, and when I say if, obviously that being the huge freaking caveat because PSA is closed for their bulk service right now, and who knows when, if ever at this point they're going to open up. We're probably talking a year or two down the line, because right now it sounds like PSA is still backlogged for their bulk all the way to like May of 2020. So that's a long time. And May 2020 is really still not like that huge flood of cards we saw hit PSA. So when those bulk tiers will be opened up, and I don't even know what sports cards looks like. It really, again, my experience really only revolves around Pokemon. But it's going to be a long time to get those cards back. So CGC is just very lucky to be in a position where, honestly, guys, there's almost just like no other option at this point. Sure, you can go to some of like the really lower tier grading card companies like a GMA or something like that. But it's weird too because people will say, well, you shouldn't care about the grade. You should care about the card. And then they'll say, go with CGC because, again, don't care about the grade, care about the card. But then, like I just mentioned, GMA, people will hear GMA and they'll puke a little bit in their mouth and they'll say, whoa, you can't go with GMA. You'll get no value for your card. And it's just like, huh? What argument are you having? You just told me to not care about the grade. But then when I mention a different grading card company, people have a heart attack. So it's like, listen, value of graded cards is very important. And at the end of the day, the true value to have your cards graded is with PSA. But I don't really have a good answer to that either, because PSA being closed. So it puts yourself in a rock and a hard place. Do you sit on your cards for what could be an eternity at this point, or do you send them to CGC? And what's your long-term goal? What type of collector are you? What do you want to do? You know, that all is going to be different on person to person. Do I believe now, if you continue to send a lot of what I would consider your higher quality, higher grade cards, and hopefully all you guys out there have graded cards, and I've always said this, grading cards is one of the most important things you can do in the hobby, because it really gets you to become a better collector investor as soon as you start to understand different grading skills, because understanding card condition and understanding what a card potentially will grade is so valuable to you, especially when you're buying bulk lots or you're buying raw cards, to be able to pick up a card and look at it yourself and understand what grade you expect to get and be right more or less. That is going to be huge for you. And again, the reason why that's going to be super huge for you is because the price you're going to pay for a raw card, and for that card to grade a 9 or for that card to grade a 10, the price difference is so astronomically drastic. Like I said, it's very important for you to get super familiar with those grading cards standards. And the only way you're going to get familiar with it is either one, buy a ton of graded cards. But if you're buying graded cards, you're probably going after higher grades, so like 8, 9, 10s. So you might not even have a lot of experience with the lower grades. But if you can have the ability to submit like huge bulk lots of hundreds of cards and, you know, different varieties of different grades of your cards, yeah, you're going to get better at understanding how those skills work. And that's just extremely important. I can't stress that enough. But when you go into like the foreseeable future, and I know this is hard for a lot of people, especially what I've noticed in this hobby is for people to just sit back and look at the future in this hobby is very tough. We have these conversations all the time, you know, whether we're talking about sealed product and what prices will be in 4 years, or we're talking about graded cards and what prices will be. But in this case, we're just talking about when will graded card companies open and what would be the long-term effects. And right now, CGC is picking up a ton of market share. So it's very possible that CGC does push Beckett out of that number 2 spot. Now, the question is, do I believe that CGC ever can catch up to PSA when it comes to prices of their graded cards, and either just catch up and be on pace and on par and even with PSA prices, or even go one step further and have CGC graded cards be worth more than PSA graded cards and to have that premium? And my answer to that question is just a no. It's a no to both of them. No, I don't ever think CGC will be able to catch up to PSA and be even dollar to dollar. And I also never see a situation in that like a CGC 8 gets a higher price than a PSA 8. Sure, will there be outliers here and there? Yes, of course. But throughout the entire hobby, as an average, no, I do not see that happening. Sure, like I said, you can definitely get those one-off cards here and there, but overall, no. And I do feel that their over harshness on modern cards can be their downfall going into the future also, because if people are continuing to get lower grades when they could probably easily gotten 9s or 10s at PSA, will people really have a huge incentive when PSA opens to send the CGC, knowing that they are much more likely to get a lower grade for their modern cards at CGC versus sending their cards to PSA? And yeah, I've heard a lot of people say that PSA's grading has become a lot stricter as of recently. Personally, I can't really talk to that, because I haven't got a PSA return back this year. Yeah, you heard that correct. I have not got one PSA return in 2021. That's how backed up they are. And the one return that I am waiting on is not even like a huge return. So I have to take a lot of people of just what they're saying, that PSA's grading skills have gotten harsher again. I can't really comment on that either way. But like I said, do I see people, if you can submit a modern card to PSA, get a 10, versus submit it to CGC and get a 9, 9.5, will people have that incentive to do it? The answer is probably no. So where does CGC fall in the long term of the hobby? And that's just to be determined. And yeah, is that a freaking cop-out to say it's to be determined? Of course it's a cop-out. But honestly, I just don't have a crystal ball. I don't have that ability. But now here's the caveat of this entire conversation, of this entire video. Am I going to stop submitting cards to CGC? No. I've submitted a lot. Now, has the $15 price point for bulk really scared me away? Yeah, it has scared me away. And the reason why is because, when you lose a lot of that, dollar amount that you can make on cards, it's tough. And honestly, I send away so many of my cards to PWCC auctions because it's, honestly, guys, it's just so easy for me. The prices I've been getting at auction are a lot of times higher than my buy it now prices would be. So a lot of the cards that I would send to CGC, I've always tried to send my higher tier cards to PSA. Again, having all their tiers closed, I haven't been doing that. But sending cards away for those bulk services to CGC, I can't really do that at $15 because I got $15 grading fees for CGC. You have the $5 fee for cards less than $50 at PWCC. That brings you the $20 plus the PWCC fee on top of that. You quickly just evaporate any money you could do. But when CGC was still a little over $7 with the membership discount that you used to got, plus with PWCC's fee of $5 plus their fee, you could still make it work on cards that sold for, $35, $40, $45, still under that $50 mark. You can still make it work. And the beautiful thing about grading cards is grading cards takes no work. And when I say it takes no work is you could just put together a huge submission very easily. While grading has like this barrier of entry for a lot of people that they're just afraid to do it. Guys, it's the easiest thing you can do. And the return on your investment is usually huge, as long as you're not just submitting just absolute garbage and you're very understanding of stuff like that. But anyways, just wanted to make this video. I wanted to kind of do an update, where I stand with CGC, what I think is going on. I'm expecting a couple returns to come back to me. And, I'm looking forward to those. Who knows when they're going to come. But it is interesting, guys. I am very curious about their new change turnaround times, if they're going to be true or not. As of right now, like I said, with bulk versus economy, that does not appear to be true, even in the slightest. But only time will tell on that. But hey, listen, guys. If you enjoyed this video, do me a favor. Go down below, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, leave a comment. Let me know what your experience has been. Other than that, I'll catch you guys on the next video.